Friday webinar series. As you know, that the Foundation for Economic Growth is a policy-oriented think tank. On policy issues, we invite the best minds from across the world to speak to us. It is in that context, today we have Nobel laureate Paul Milgrom speaking to us. And I have known him while I was doing my postdoctorate studies at Stanford. And I can tell you, this is going to be amongst the best lectures we have heard today. We've been hearing in the series. Today's session is being chaired by the chairman of EGROW Foundation, Dr. Arvind Virmani. Dr. Arvind Virmani is a well-known name in policymaking in India and abroad. He was the chief economic advisor of our country, and he was the executive director at the International Monetary Fund. He has his own PhD thesis from Harvard University. He has published extensively. He has worked in the Planning Commission and the ministry, and his forte is policy making. And he has also been writing his books to his credit on geopolitics as well. With this, I hand over the session to Dr. Arvind Virman.
Thank you, Charan. So it's a great pleasure to have Professor Milgrom, who is the Eli Professor of Humanities and Social Sciences in the Department of University. He doesn't need an introduction, except Charan has already mentioned that in 2020, he was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics, which is actually called something else, but Riksbank Prize, for improvements in auction theory and invention of new auction formats. He is also the co-founder for Autonomics, which designs and advises bidders in high-stakes auctions. So with that, a brief introduction. I'm sure you read about his many academic awards and honors on his website. With that, let me invite you, Professor Milgrom, to give your talk. Because
okay. Well, hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Late, and it's
Sure. I'll hang around for a little bit after the talk.
Go ahead.
Okay, so is that all right? My topic today is market design for doing good. It's there have been 2 Nobel Prizes in the area of market design. Al Roth and Lloyd Shapley won some years ago for their work on matching market design, and Bob Wilson and I won last year for we were cited for our work in auctions. But these 2 fields are actually very closely related, and I wanted to give people some idea of the whole field of market design and the kinds of things that that can be done. And so let's launch in. So I'm going to talk about a number of different market design innovations that have happened in the last couple of decades. I'm going to talk about food banks. So this is an interesting market design that we'll see. It's charitable food distribution, so no money can be involved, but we're still trying to get the right resources to the right places. In some areas, the food need is different from other areas. They have local donations, and what the National Distribution Center donates to them needs to fill their missing needs, and we have to have efficient resource allocation to take care of the hungry in the most effective way. The second topic in here that we'll talk about is a bit about kidneys. Now, the renal disease takes many lives and is very costly in terms of both life and treasure. One of the developments in the last 20 years has been the development of a kidney exchange, and I'll show you exactly how that works. But basically, there are kidney donors who show up with patients. They're willing to donate kidneys, but their compatibility is bad. But there's the possibility that my donor is a good match for you and your donor is a good match for me. And so sometimes there are gains from trade. And again, this is something that happens without money. I'm going to connect that actually to ride sharing. You'll see that there's a connection between the way we think about market design for kidneys, where there's no money involved, and market design for ride sharing, where there is money involved. And I'll show you some of that. Cap and trade. I've shown you cap and trade. Often, many of you will be thinking about various environmental resources. You might be thinking about carbon markets these days. That's very much in the news. I was involved in a design for a fisheries cap and trade. There's overfishing in many parts of the world. I was working with the government in Chile, which is still working on this. Chile has a 4,000-mile long coastline, and lots of areas are overfished and lots of species, and they've capped that and then created the possibility of trading fisheries licenses. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that works too. Radio spectrum, which is privatization of which is something that I'm particularly known for. That's something that the Nobel Committee described. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what makes that special. One of the things I want to emphasize for you that each of these cases is different. And one of the things that people are surprised to learn, I think, is that market design really does need to be tailored to the characteristics of the market. On the one hand, each market is a little different. On the other hand, there's some general principles that are applicable that let us take our knowledge and our learning from one market to the other. Internet advertising is also an area that's actually, this is how Google makes all of its money. It essentially it sells advertising on its web pages, and they designed novel auctions. They have mere milliseconds to determine which ads to place based on the characteristic of the person who browses there, and how you can run a market and with that speed. Well, the technology is developed to do that. And finally, there are innovations going on in financial markets. I've been asked to talk to the New York Stock Exchange about their opening and closing auctions, but there are more issues than that. And I will touch a little bit on all of these as I pass through this lecture, just to give you some idea of the scope of the whole area of market design, that there's lots of ways to adapt to the specific needs. So let's start with food banks. There's millions of, I'm not sure what the current numbers are. Things have gotten worse during the pandemic. But we have millions of people who are in need of food assistance. And there are local food banks that collect from grocery stores and from restaurants and so on excess food, and they take food donations and distribute them. But there's also a national organization called Feeding America. And Feeding America was collecting donations nationally and distributing it to local food banks where it could serve hungry people, but it was doing it pretty badly. The problem of getting the right food to the right places is, it's very much like any other economic problem where we're trying to get resources into the right hands, and we'd really like to encourage trading. But these people are poor, and the food banks don't have a lot of money, so no money could be involved in running this transaction. And is there? Okay, I thought I heard Sharon ask me something. Anyway, no money is involved in this transaction, and they were having a problem with sending the wrong things to the wrong places. They were, the food banks in Alaska were particularly short of fresh produce, and the Feeding America thought it was too expensive to send fresh produce to Alaska. They were unaware that there was a special need there. There was even a case where they sent potatoes to Idaho. Well, for those of you who know the United States, Idaho is where we grow most of our potatoes. There were plenty of local donations. They didn't need potatoes. And what they needed was a better allocation of food. And this guy here, I hope you can see my pen. Let's see if I can find this guy. Maybe that's is this showing? Maybe it's not showing. All right, I'll just leave it here. This guy here that I hope I'm highlighting for you is Kenneth Prendergast, professor at the University of Chicago who helped them redesign, Feeding America redesigned its market. And this is one of 210 major food distribution centers in the United States. This one is the Greater Chicago Food Depository. And you can see it stacked with shelves full of foods of different kind, where they're trying to provide appropriate foods to each separate food bank. Now, what Canis proposed that they do is they don't have real money, but they can have fake money. The way the Feeding America had worked is it had determined a need for each area, and it said if your need was 4% of the total, that you would get 4% of the food that they distributed. And Canis said, rather than giving you 4% of the food, why didn't they give you 4% of the share credits and let you bid for the food you wanted with the credits they provided? So this is a screenshot, actually, of share distribution. So each food bank is given some number of shares. So this particular food bank has, can you see my pointer? Okay, yes. Okay, this food bank has 60,000 shares available for bidding, and it has credit that it can borrow up to 57,000 shares. So the maximum bid it can make is 117,000 shares. And these are the things that are available today. There's a load of Gold Peak Minute Maid beverage, and there's one load of that, and it's available in Waco, Texas, and it weighs 27,000 pounds, I guess, and you can bid for it. There's a load of dairy, Silk Cashew, a load of Yoplait yogurt, a load of, this is not food, but Equate Cold and Hot Patch. These are other things that are also distributed by the Food Distribution Center. And you can see they're located in various places: Waco, Texas in the south, Mount Crawford, Virginia in the east, Portland, Oregon in the west. And if you buy something, you have to arrange to have it shipped to where you need it. So, so these things will have different values to the different food distribution centers. And by bidding in this way, you're able to allow the centers to decide what they need. And what happens is that every night, the balance of the winning bids are taken and distributed back to all the other food distribution center in proportion to their priorities. So if you had, 1% priority, you would get back 1% of whatever was bid. That assures that, in essence, that your spending in total will be about 1% of the total spending. So that's how this was arranged. And this particular system went live in 15 years ago in July 2005. And Canis collected data from 2005 to 2011, where there were 60,000 auctions. And then he compared it to the previous period, going back to 2000, to see exactly, whether this thing did any good. And here's some of the changes that were observed. First of all, when the food banks were bidding for themselves, they got things that were closer. The mean load distance changed from over 1,000, from about 1,100 miles to about 700 miles, or from 1075 miles to 646 miles. So they were about 400 miles closer. They saved almost 40% of their transportation costs in that way. So that was one thing that changed. Smaller food banks tended to acquire cheaper food and in greater volume. So they acquired 72% more food by weight, which was of slightly lower average quality nutritionally than it had been before, but a lot more food they acquired, and showing that their tastes were different than the tastes of the larger food banks. And third, the donors were happy, because it used to be there were donations would be rejected. Somebody would be offered the food, and they would say, well, that's too far, or we don't need that food. And rejected donations plummeted. And the donors were very happy about that. As you'll see, the donations increased as a result. That people could be confident that the donations they were given would be used. So there were part of the result was more and better supply from traditional donors. Let's see. Okay, so that's all. I've got a bunch of things to go through. That's all I'm going to say about charitable food distribution. I'm trying to give you the idea that you can be creative. Where there are gains from trade, we can find ways to unlock them by being creative about the ways that's done. Kidney exchange. Well, kidney disease is a big problem. In the United States, these are statistics I just downloaded while I was preparing this talk last week. There are 90,000 patients today, as of last week, that are on waiting lists for kidney transplant in the United States. And the dialysis that they receive while they're waiting is extremely expensive. Currently it's 1.2% of the entire U.S. federal budget, the entire federal budget. So this is it's the biggest single healthcare cost item in the Medicare budget, and more than 1% of the entire U.S. federal budget. And people are dying while they're waiting for kidneys. In 2018, 10,000 people died. 10,000 people went off the list. They died or became too sick to receive a transplant. So we'd like to be able to save lives. And this is a continuing problem. This is over a period of years, the flow, and you can see we're getting between 35 and 40,000 patients a year that are coming and needing kidneys, and fewer than 20,000, something between 15 and 20,000 new kidneys becoming available a year. So people are dying for lack of kidneys, and this is a major problem. Now, the idea is, 20 years ago, people weren't doing this very much. 20 years ago, this was rare. The idea is that you might have a donor and a patient. So we have at the top line donor 1 and patient 1, and she is willing to give a kidney to him to save his life. She's his sister or something. She only needs 1 kidney to live her life well, and she's willing to do that. But it turns out they're incompatible. Their blood types could be different. There can be a tissue type incompatibility. So for some reason, she's incompatible. And similarly, there's another donor. There's a man willing to give to a woman here, and he too is incompatible. And yet, it's possible that an exchange could take place. And 20 years ago, one of the reasons this was rare, and this is something that people don't seem to understand a lot about market design, is that in order to find these trades, there has to be records. You have to be able to tell that donor 2 is compatible with patient 1, and donor 1 is compatible with patient 2. And it used to be that if a couple came and said they were willing to do a donation, and they were incompatible, they would say, sorry, you're incompatible, and send you home. And nobody would ever know that donor 1 was compatible with patient 2. So a record-keeping system needed to be established. And that was one of the big steps in making kidney exchange possible. And then we need to think about what kind of exchanges make sense. You can very well imagine that larger exchanges might make sense. It might be that donor 1 is compatible with patient 2, and donor 2 with patient 3, and donor 3 with patient 1. Now, this is kind of hard to arrange as a simultaneous exchange. If you wanted to do this, you would need to have 6 operating rooms, 3 to remove kidneys and 3 to put the kidneys in. And they used to do these things simultaneously to make sure that nobody reneged. That's just really hard to do. Now, if you've studied traditional matching theory, they have algorithms to tell you how to do these things in the best ways, to save the most lives or the most life years or so on. But the algorithms, the theory that existed until recently, was theory that said, suppose we have a set of patients and donors, what's the best way to match them? And that's not the way patients and donors really appear. They actually, somebody gets sick and they appear over time. And it might be that you make a match today, and you would have been better off if you'd waited a day because somebody else was coming. And by the way, that's a general principle in dynamic market design. So just to as almost a humorous way, I'm going to show you how the principle of dynamic matching also applies to Uber, to ride sharing, and it works kind of like this. This is the way Uber used to match riders to cars in its earliest days. So it was on a first to request basis. So if this guy over here requested a ride and this car was closest, this car would be sent to pick up rider 1. And then when the request was made by rider 2, this car would go over to rider 2, and there would be an 11 minutes of total wait time, 2 minutes to get to this rider and 9 minutes to get to that one. But these days, they wait a little bit before they make the assignment. And what happens now, this rider comes in and they say, please wait a moment. And they gather a few riders together. And then this rider comes in and they say, you know what? If I send this one here, that's 4 minutes. And this one here, that's 4 minutes. I can reduce the total waiting time from 11 minutes to 8 minutes. So this is the same principle that we have also in kidney exchange. If you don't have to make the exchanges simultaneously, one thing you can do is you can give a kidney to a patient and have the donor available to give to another patient later. And donors do sometimes renege, but it's rare. If I give a kidney to your patient, you will almost always follow through, or your donor will almost always follow through. And here's a long chain example. This is an extreme example, but it sort of makes the point. This was from 2009, and where Matt Jones, who was just a good Samaritan, he wasn't associated with anybody, decided to give donate a kidney, which was given to Barbara Bonnell, whose husband then donated a kidney to Anna Heckman, whose mother then donated a kidney to Cecilia Janiski, and so on. And this resulted in a lot of lives being saved. And the ability to do this sequentially and find better matches in that way is a critical part of this whole process. So that bit about kidney exchange. Let's see. Cap and trade. Let me just say a few words about cap and trade too. Cap and trade is, you see it for carbon emissions. There's attempts to do cap and trade for carbon emissions. It's already in use for things like fisheries. Here I'm showing a picture from an auction in New South Wales, Australia in 2016. And there were about 1,000 fishers on boats in boats going out doing fishing in Australia. And they had 100 different, this is a complicated auction because they had 100 different kinds of rights. Rights varied by species and they varied by location. And Australia has large fishing areas. And the fishing was unsustainable. The catch was too large. They needed to reduce the catch. And consequently, they reduced the amount that you could get for each share. Your share entitled you to a percentage of the allowable catch. And when the allowable catch fell, we had fishing boats that were not full. It was an uneconomic way to run the fishing industry. And what was needed was for some fishing boats to just stop and sell their rights to others. And they needed to sell the rights to the correct others so that you wanted to be catching all of your fish in one geographic area, for example. Or if you were already catching, a fish in one species, you wanted the accompanying species that swims with it in the same area, or you wanted to be able to catch more fish in that area. So they needed to allocate these 100 different kinds of rights among 1,000 fishers. And they used a two-price process. The government added a subsidy so that what the sellers received was more than what the buyers paid. And they allowed what's called entirety bidding, which means that it would be possible for you as a fisherman to say, I want to sell all of my rights or none of them. Here's my entire bundle. That's called entirety bidding, or incremental bidding, that you could say, I want to buy additional shares of things I already have. So they allowed bidding of that sort. And they successfully transitioned to a smaller fishing industry and used the subsidy effectively and resulted in a relatively efficient allocation. I was involved this last year in talking to the Chilean government about fishing. Chile has a really long coastline, about 4,000 miles, and with lots of different fishing areas and similarly many species. And the regulators set caps for each. And what we at Auctionomics did, our proposal, which the Chilean Senate is considering making law, is that fishing licenses would be specified in a way that included the catch of a product and its accompanying species. It makes bidding easier instead of having to throw out some of the fish that you catch that you're not allowed to catch. When you're catching a species, those things should be packaged. We specified bids that would allow downward sloping demand, and that were specified in a way that would allow substitution too. One of the things that's really hard in a multi-product auction is it might be that you want one area or another, or you want one species or another, and you don't know which one to bid for because you don't know what the prices are going to be. You don't like to have auctions that where bidders enter with that kind of uncertainty, where they have to guess which products they should be bidding for. So we created an auction in which bidders could express substitution. They say, I'm trying to catch a certain amount of biomass. Here are the prices I'm willing to pay. I want to get the best deal. And then the auction system works out the allocation that gives them the best deal. And they were also interested in some industrial policy. They wanted to limit the amount of catch won by any single bidder or group of bidders. And that was also built into the design. The auction, given this demand information, sets prices to clear the markets. It knows what supply it has available in each area. And we find market clearing prices that include these substitution effects, include downward sloping demand. It's pretty high tech by comparison with the auctions that were running before, in which bidders just had to guess what to bid for and how much to bid. Oops. Okay, and here's an example just to give you an idea of how it would go. If there were 3 products, well, this shows 2 products, an area and a species, and a bidder might have decided it was bidding for 5 units of product 1 at $220 a unit and 2 units at $150 a unit. So these were its total bids. The parts in gray are what's filled out by the bidder, and this multiplication is, of course, just done by the system. And what would happen then is that the highest bid for each product among the bidders would win up to the available quantity, and a winning bidder would pay the price that it bid. Now, that creates the problem I've described, where bidders need to guess about which products to bid for and how to allocate a limited bid budget. If this bid of $150 was going to win, this bidder will end up paying $1,400 for the 7 units that it would win here. And it might not have if it had a budget of $1,200, it wouldn't know that it could have afforded to bid for 7 units because it would have to limit its bid to stay within its budget. So what we wanted was a uniform price auction where bidders didn't have to guess so much about price. They could merely express their demand, and they didn't have to guess whether if they did this, they might win both product 1 and product 2 in the old auction, and really they only wanted 1. And in the new auction, that we proposed, the rules would be like this. The bidders would make bids very much like before, but they would also put a weight on each product. So the first product, A1, they give a weight of 200 per unit, and the second product, they give a weight of 300 per unit. That might be the biomass, or it might be some whatever they like that guides the substitution. And then they say, I'm trying to win 2,500 units, and I don't want more than that. And then what the system will do is it says, okay, this describes a demand curve in which if we give this guy a lot of product 1, we don't have to give him very much of product 2, and vice versa. And the first 2 rows encode downward sloping demand for the first product. The group limit gets you substitution between the 2 products, and then the auction determines market clearing prices. So this makes it easier and reduces the guesswork and improves the efficiency of the allocation. Okay. Let me turn to radio spectrum. Am I doing on time here? It's half past. Okay, let me turn to radio spectrum for a moment. This is something I've done a lot of work on over the last 25 years. 25 years. And I want to just show you something that happened this year, just to give you some idea of the subtleties involved. This is 5G auctions in the US and UK in the first quarter of 2021. And in both of them, the main part of the offering was what's so-called mid-band spectrum. Here was the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band. Here's the 3.6 to 3.8. These are very comparable frequencies. These parts of the spectrum have the same kind of use in 5G technology. And in both of them, they were running so-called simultaneous multiple round clock auctions with what's called an assignment stage. I won't get into too much detail. But what I want you to notice is the difference in results. In the UK, the prices came out to 9 cents a megahertz pop. Now, the way we measure prices for radio spectrum is we say, well, we need a quantity measure, and we say a license is larger in proportion to the amount of bandwidth measured in megahertz, and it's larger in proportion to the amount of population it covers, that's pops. And we multiply the bandwidth times the population to get a quantity measure, and so 9 cents per megahertz pop, these are US dollars prices, represents the price per unit that was being paid in the UK. In the US, just a month earlier, the price was $1.10 per megahertz pop. That's a huge factor difference, factor of 12 about. And you might wonder what went on that did this. And this is something that one needs to worry about. In the UK, so what have I got here? Okay. I don't have it. Okay. Well, my mistake here, I've been putting together the slides, but what happened in the UK was a form of collusion. They had 24 lots for sale in the UK, and in the first round, they had active competition. The losers in the first round, the price went up. They increased, they bid for a lower quantity, basically a third of the spectrum. The other bidders said, yeah, if we can get a third of the spectrum at a low price, that's a good idea. So they dropped their bids to a third of the spectrum, and the auction only ran for 3 rounds. This auction ran for like 140 rounds. This auction ran for 3 rounds. The bidders simply decided that they were going to split it up. You have to design well to avoid that, and it's one of the things that when we design radio spectrum auctions, we're concerned about. Okay. I guess I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to you about my personal biggest success. This is, the most complicated resource allocation problem in history that was done using an auction was the U.S. Broadcast Incentive Auction. And here the goal was to take spectrum that was used for television broadcast and make it available for mobile data. And we needed the broadcasters to sell their rights, and we needed the mobile operators to buy the rights. And one of the really hard parts was figuring out how to buy the rights. So here, this is a graph of an area in the northeastern United States. Each node in this graph, each dot, which is called a node in this graph, represents the location of a television broadcast station. And each edge in this graph, an edge is one of these lines that connects 2 nodes. Each edge in the graph represents a pair of stations that can't both be assigned to the same channel without causing interference in their broadcasts. And there are a lot of nodes connected to this red node. They're all in this pink or salmon color. And then each of them is connected to other nodes, which are shown in white. And the the whole thing looks like this for the United States and Canada. This was done jointly by the US and Canada. Very dense east of the Mississippi, very dense in the on the West Coast. In these areas, in particular areas on the West Coast. And the problem we were trying to get the auction to do was to choose a set of stations that would continue broadcasting. We weren't buying all of the rights, to maximize the total value while fitting them into a reduced set of broadcast channels so that we could make some of this spectrum available for mobile broadband. And the question of when it's possible, if you give me a set of stations, is it even possible to pack them in a way that allows them to continue to broadcast? Well, there are about 130,000 of these constraints about pairs of stations that can't be assigned to the same channel. And this is a famous problem that most of you probably don't know about, NP completeness. So let me tell you about this. There is in computer science a branch of computer science called complexity theory, which is basically about how hard problems are to solve, and how rapidly the runtimes grow with the size of the problem. And roughly speaking, NP-complete problems means that worst-case runtime grow exponentially with the problem size. You don't want to start sticking a number like 130,000 into an exponent of any number bigger than 1. You're going to get some very long runtimes if you do that. So if you want to be able to answer the question, given a set of stations, is it possible to assign a set of channels? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell one more detail. This problem is, I told you it's a classic problem. It's called the graph coloring problem. And the graph coloring problem is, given a graph like this, nodes and edges, is there any way, and a set of colors, is there any way to assign a color to each node so that no two connected nodes are the same color? Well, that's the same problem. Is there any way to assign a channel to each TV station so that no two connected stations are on the same channel? This is just a classic problem, and it's known to be NP complete, which means that there aren't any algorithms that will always be able to answer this question, which means even checking feasibility of packing a set of stations is a hard problem. So this made this historically complex auction to design. And what we did is we designed a new class of descending auctions in which the auction system would say something like this: Sharon, your TV station, you've got a little piece of paper in front of you, you've done a study and it's worth $5 million to you, and the government says to you, would you sell your station for $20 million? And if you say yes, then you continue. If you say no, you keep your station, you exit the auction. If you say yes, from your perspective, I might pay you $20 million to buy your station, or maybe I'll come back and say, you know, I got more offers than I need. How about 19 million? And this is a really easy auction for you because there's all these hard computations going on under the surface. But from your perspective, if your station's worth $5 million and I say, would $20 million be acceptable? The answer is obviously yes. If you say no, you just keep your station. If you say yes, you can't do anything. You can't do worse than keeping your station. So you're going to keep your station. And when the auction ends, all the sellers receive their prices. So the point was to create a design that was really simple for the bidders, but also something that we could actually implement by sophisticated technology in the back when we're deciding which stations to make offers to and when and whether we need a station in order to clear sufficient spectrum. And that was done. And that was a $20 billion auction. I'm kind of proud of the properties of this class that we invented. They can all be smoothly adapted to limited computation capacity. They can all be smoothly extended to budget constraints. We have a limited amount we can spend. They're all obviously strategy proof, which is what I just described to you, that Sharon knows what to do. They're group strategy proof, which means there's no group of bidders unless they make side payments among each others. There's no collusive opportunity that bidders have that doesn't involve making side payments. They can be designed to promote efficiency or cost minimization, and so on. They have a number of good properties. All right, I'm running short of time, so let me just tell you that we tested this with some simulations and found that the rules that we devised for the FCC on a small problem where you could actually do the computations very much 1,000 times faster than trying to do an optimization with a Vickrey auction. Our simulations took an average of 1.5 CPU hours when we ran our rules and 90 CPU days for the Vickrey rules. Our auction was designed to partly reduce costs and was 25% cheaper than the Vickrey auction and only 5% less efficient. That is, the stations that we took off the air were slightly more valuable than if you tried to minimize the value of the stations you took off the air. So that's what we managed to achieve with this design. All right, let's see, I guess I'll finish up by just saying a few words. Internet advertising is yet another novel area where there's been new market design. Every time you search for anything using Google, for example, you'll see a series of ads. These ads are sold by a new kind of auction design. And the same thing applies to display advertising. Anytime the display advertising, some of it is sold under guaranteed contracts, and some of it is sold by auctions that are run by by exchanges that serve the publishers of each website. Okay, last thing, my last topic in the last couple of minutes, financial markets. There's a lot of new ideas. Don't really have time to talk about them in any detail. I've been talking with the New York Stock Exchange about the opening and closing auctions, but there's also work about trading rules and about how IPOs should be run, and many different ideas. There's a lot of principles that are shared in common in market design. And I've tried to give you some sense of what some of them are. We're trying to promote trade. We're trying to make it easy for bidders to bid. One of the hallmarks of the design is allowing more sophisticated transaction without creating complexity for the bidders. We want to make it easy for parties to participate, fewer mistakes, less guesswork, and we want the algorithms themselves to promote the good outcomes. And I think that pretty much covers my time. So thank you very much. I don't hear anybody.
That was, yeah. So, no, it's very good. I mean, in my case, I did see options, but this is much more than I expected. But still, it's useful to know about it. Sharon, do you want to make any comments or questions?
Yes, I just wanted to mention to the professor, when we started the market borrowing program on auction basis in the Reserve Bank of India, that's the time when I'd come to Stanford to do postdoctoral, and that's when I used to discuss with you. And we knew about the uniform price auction, the multiple auction, and we thought about just two of them. But listening to you today, now I can't imagine so much has happened in the auction theory, and that you've been involved for 25 years in the auction that you said about the spectrum and the radios, and how complex these have become is mind-boggling. So really thanks for sharing these ideas with us and linking them up from the food to the financial markets. I think we'll come back to you in a day or two, but right now I think there are quite a few questions in the chat box, sir, which we can give them an opportunity to ask.
Okay. Let's see. Do you see? Should we ask Jena? You want to with Dr. Jena?
See two questions there. Shall I read them out and answer them, or shall I?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So I see from Jenna, is the primary motive for market design the need to address market failures, and how experimental economics helps testing market design before introducing them into operating markets. Okay, so I wouldn't say that it's just about market failures. My friend Al Roth has an analogy that he likes to use. You know, we like free markets where people are free to do things. And Al says we like, when we have wheels, we like them to spin freely. But to spin freely, they need to have a finely machined hub and plenty of oil. The idea is that some kinds of transactions are inherently complex, and that in order for the free market to operate freely, it needs to have the right infrastructure designed. I described that already with the kidney exchange, where there needed to be information infrastructure so you could find trading parties. In a recent book of mine, I give some land examples where the land allocation in the US was very bad because the registries that said you want to buy your neighbor's property so you can expand your farm, but your neighbor's not there, he's not farming, and you have no idea who owns it and how to buy the farm. So the information infrastructure is one of the things that needs to be provided. So I wouldn't call those things market failures. I would simply say it's part of the infrastructure that you need to have a successful market. Now, about experimental economics, so there are some things that we can run experiments with, and experimental economics is useful for testing some designs. When I first proposed the simultaneous multiple round auction 25 years ago, they ran experiments of that against alternative designs in Caltech, and those were informative and helpful. Some of these designs, however, the challenge is not about human behavior for some of these designs. The challenges are technical ones. You know, we don't know when we try to simplify to make it easy for bidders to bid, whether that will work well might depend on the nature of the values they have or the kinds of transactions that we're trying to have made, and that involves some understanding of the empirical situation. So we needed to design the FCC spectrum auction to understand in detail all the interference constraints. And that wasn't about running experiments with people, although it did involve some computational experiments. Let's see. How would you like to go over these other questions?
Well, if you can see them, you can pick out any questions which you'd like. That would be fine if you've read them. Otherwise,
okay, they're popping up quickly. I would prefer if you would.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to. Okay.
Well, Anurag's question is good.
Yeah, you talk too much about financial. Which one?
Anurag?
Yeah, I think I would also be interested if you can give some example of financial market auctions in financial market. Can you give us some example of that?
Well, sure. So examples of it and some new ideas that are going on. Sure, I can tell you about both. So we have had from time to time auctions for IPOs, initial public offerings, with shares. Mostly that's not by auction. Most of those auctions have failed. I have a diagnosis for why those auctions traditionally failed, but I think would take me too far afield now. The kinds of things that people are talking about doing are what are called smart markets, and the smart markets is just a broad term that's a marketing term really to describe what they're doing. But there are a number of new things that are being done, and one of them is, for example, if you are an investor and you are a trader and you're trying to make a trade, it may be that you're trying to buy the shares of one company and sell the shares of another to keep your portfolio balanced. And you have what's called leg risk, which is to say you might succeed in making the one part of that transaction at a current price while failing to make the other part because those markets are separate. What smart markets would do is they would allow you to say, I want to maintain a ratio. I want to sell 3 shares of security X for every 2 shares I buy of security Y, and put in an order of that sort that represents your bid, and it finds market clearing prices to make those transactions go through. So that's 2 things. The auctions are indeed used for opening and closing at the New York Stock Exchange, and new ideas of smart markets are coming into play. That's one of the new ideas to improve the operation of financial markets.
Okay. Sharon, you saw some other question?
Yes, there are a couple of questions, and I thought some of them were very interesting. Professor, if Paul would like to
What
take
were
them.
you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking Nagesh had a good question. Nagesh?
Yeah, okay, Nagesh. Yeah. I can see the infrastructure edition. Yeah. Okay, Nagesha?
I can read that question.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
How to bring more competition in
Please go ahead.
infrastructure construction and operations through auctions when we have very few bidders. Yeah, well, that's part of what I was trying to highlight, and I'm sorry I failed to do this as nicely as I wanted. But the part of what I was trying to highlight, that whether an auction performs well can depend on just that. So in the British communications auction earlier this year, where there were really only 3 serious bidders, they managed to collude instantly. Whereas in the U.S. auction, where there were something like 100 bidders, and where Verizon desperately needed a lot of spectrum, we got very intense competitive bidding. So and the auction can't undo. If you have only 1 bidder, there's not much you can do. The auction design is not going to be very helpful. You can do things that mitigate the problem. You can have credits for small. If you want to encourage entry, you can include bidding credits in a design, so that if you're selling something, for example, you can say that if a small bidder wins, its price is discounted from its bid. That makes it a more effective competitor. Often doing that, although the small bidders get whatever they buy for less, the large bidders end up paying more because they face more intensive competition, and that can be effective in some situations. But it's always a problem if you have limited competition. There's no way to make that disappear by just by clever auction design.
There's a good question from Sai Premnath. Paul, if you would like to take that.
But from whom?
Sai Premnath.
Where is that?
What existing markets do you think are ripe for redesign through auction theory and would greatly benefit from it?
So the kinds of markets from auction theory. So we're talking about markets that have already gone past the first stage, where they have decent infrastructure. That is, there's enough information, at least, that you can find out who owns what. I think for me right now, the market I'm most interested in making a big change in, I'm launching an initiative this year, is water rights. We have all around the world, as a result of climate change, we have changes in water use and water availability. We have droughts. In the last year, we had droughts on 6 continents. The only continent that didn't have any droughts was Antarctica, and there's no people there. So we need to ensure, and most water use, a lot of water use is stuck in decisions that were made in the last centuries. They're a century old or more. They're in farming in particular places for particular crops, and sometimes they're very wasteful compared to much higher valued uses or elsewhere. Sometimes the water is just sprayed when it could be used more effectively. And we also need to encourage in water the development of new sources. There are deep brines which could be available new water sources if we could filter them, but it's uneconomic to do that unless there's a price for water that so that you can sell what you've created. So, you know, if we want to start dealing with these problems and easing the impact of droughts and developing those things, and that involves, and this is just to give you an idea of what's involved in market design, that involves a number of changes from what we do currently. It involves better measurement of water use. So, for example, if you're a farmer, in some places, if you're a farmer along the river, you may take water from the river to irrigate your field, but 50% of that water may flow back into the river, so that your real use is not the amount of water that you took from the river. Or if you're taking water from underground, from a reservoir, often, you know, we don't have any measurement of it. We don't know how can we allocate water efficiently if we can't measure use. So I'm working with some venture capitalists who are talking about new technologies for measurement, because improved measurement is going to be part of the improved solution. And then the rights redefinitions. In radio spectrum, we needed to redefine the rights of the broadcasters to have the right not to broadcast on their current channel, but on any channel that serves the same customers from the same location. We needed to define that in order to make the rights more fungible so that we had more flexibility in doing reassignments. And for water rights too, often they're defined in really horrible ways. In the Colorado River in the US, there are use it and lose it rights. If you don't use your full allocation, your rights decline. So they'll waste water if they have extra water just so that they don't lose their rights. We need to redefine the rights so that they're secure and tradable. And we need to improve measurement so that we can tell what water is being used. And then we need to set up a market that allows the transactions to take place. I think that's a huge one, which will be of value all over the world. You know, there are a lot of areas where market design can be valuable, but this is a big one. Yeah.
Let me ask you a kind of speculative, I'm not sure there's an answer to it, but one of the problems we have is, let's say, for farmers, there's 3 ways or 4 ways to give a subsidy. Let's say water subsidy, electricity subsidy, or fertilizer, etc. Can you think of a auction procedure where the public authority can make a judgment about, you know, how we structure the subsidies, so to say, by getting information from the farmers through some kind of an auction procedure?
That was very vague in general. There are times, you know, we have auctions for subsidies. I can tell you, last year in the U.S. we had we wanted to subsidize companies to provide data services around wireless data services, and it was a procurement auction. Basically, the companies would promise to provide services and for a given amount of subsidy, and they bid against each other. That's one application. It's probably very different from what you have in mind, since but I don't know the details of what you have in mind. And one of the things about
what we do have already is bidding on, let's say, providing routes to the Northeast, you know, air routes. So companies bid on that. Things like that we have. I was just wondering, I guess it's not well defined, so let's leave it.
I mean, the markets
given the
goal in mind. Let me say this last thing about that, since I think we're running out of time here. But another important factor in market design is the objectives of the designer. So sometimes I've helped companies which were just trying to get the best price they can to raise revenue. When I work with the government, they're usually trying to promote efficiency or often to take care of, artisanal fishermen or small farmers, or they have goals. And before we can talk about what the best design is, We need the details of the circumstance and also the goals that the designer has in mind. And we discuss things that way.
Quite right, quite right. Yeah, I guess the goal, we've run out of time, but,
Yeah, but there's
the
this
goal
question,
really is,
the question which
Sharon.
the question which our chairman was asking probably.
Oops, he froze.
Yeah. So, so the goal was efficiency, but you know, they are kind of the farmers are not clear. You know, they are vested interests, they are disparate interests. So it was how to manage this. It's kind of like public opinion, but maybe using some kind of a monetary incentive or something. That's what I was thinking.
We'll have to save that for another day, I'm afraid.
Anyway,
I think we've run out of time.
I think we've run out of time. Yeah, right. So Charan, okay, so thank you. Charan, we couldn't hear you. You want to conclude you had some comment? Lost him. Okay,
in a little different way. It was put by Vandana Parikh here, where she said that could we use the auction system for better welfare schemes, to better the welfare schemes and increase the efficiency in the welfare schemes. So I thought that is what probably, given the public policy role that you have played in the last 2 decades, I thought maybe that's the question you had in mind.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to frame, but I guess as Professor Milgrom says, it's too, you know, the question we would have to get into detail. So with that, and you know, he has to go also. So let me thank you, Professor. It's a menu of stuff you put before us. I for one, and many others probably would like to reflect more on it, think of other ways of using it. So thank you. And with that, Charan, you want to add any concluding words?
Yes, I want to really profusely thank Professor for agreeing and then delivering such a beautiful talk with us, which is very informative. And as good talks are, they ignite your mind, and there's so many questions that come up. Certainly, today's presentation, as our chairman has mentioned, was extensive. And for us, many of us who've been in public policy and who have been associated with the auction system in our country, this is really very interesting and informative. As I mentioned earlier, the linkages which the professor has set before us in various sectors and provided us a complete cafeteria approach to auctions, I also think is very, very important. In today's list of participation, we do have people from the official channels, and we are going to most probably come back to the professor in a day or two and ask him further more deep questions. Hope he'll be able to spare some time with us. I must mention, for the benefit of record and the participants, when I interacted with the professor 15 years ago, in over a span of 18 months that I was there at Stanford, professor had the same attitude that he had today. When I told him that in India we're experimenting and we want to know which is the best for our market, we were doing government borrowings, short-end treasury bills, long-end government securities. He instantly said, if I can be of some help to India, into the RBI to do this and fine-tune these auctions, because there's lots of saving between different auctions. And he was ready to offer his services. That's exactly what the professor even said today. I'm so impressed that having won a Nobel Prize, nothing has changed. His quest for knowledge, his quest for experimenting. And at that time, he told me, I must share this. He said, if it's a complex issue, he is ready to spare one PhD student for us, for India to work on this. I'm so happy that we could get him today, speak to us, and still he has the same attitude. I must mention that this presentation of yours, we'll be placing it on our website tomorrow. We'll send you the link also, and I'm sure this is going to be used extensively in our country by different scholars as well as academicians. Next Friday, I'm inviting, we are on our webinar series having a panel discussion on challenges before MSMEs. And you know, the budget season has started, discussions have started, and we are going to bring in some people who run their own MSMEs, and they're going to share with us the challenges that they face. And so therefore it's going to be very, very important for the academicians who do research on MSMEs, as well as the policymakers who are thinking in terms of budget proposals for the MSMEs. With this, I would like to thank all the participants. This is the first time we have experimented so late in the evening, and I'm very impressed with the sort of enthusiasm we have seen. More than 160 participants late night watching and participating with us. You have seen in the chat box a number of questions. We can't take all of them because of shortage of time, but the interest shown by the participants is also immense, and we thank you for that. So once again, let me thank Paul for your presence as well as your presentation, and let me thank everybody for the participation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.